Right, okay, we're now on 12:31. So why don't we begin? And by the time I've got through my intro, I'm sure lots more people will have joined the call. Thank you very much for joining today. We're delighted to welcome you to this seminar, which promises to be a really fascinating session. So my name is Kirstine Schifris and I am the president of the UK Evaluation Society. I'll just give you a quick introduction to us and to the topic and a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Oliver, who will give us an overview of the topic around whether AI will change the world. And then we'll have time at the end for some questions. So for those of you not familiar with us, the UK Evaluation Society is the UK's largest professional membership body. We offer training, networking, resources, including free webinars like this one, to support the evaluation profession. Our next big conference is titled Data in Focus, and it's taking place in May in 2025 up in Glasgow. And if you haven't got your ticket yet, there's still plenty of time to get the early bird ticket. And the call for abstracts is ending on the 13th of January if you'd like to put anything in. You can find more out about this on our website, evaluation.org.uk. I've also got some exciting news to share before we get started. Due to the popularity of this and interest of the topic today, we're partnering with the Social Research Association and the Campaign for Social Sciences. And in 2025, as three organisations, we're launching a series of AI webinars to shed some light on the complex world of AI and the opportunities that it presents. So please do look out for further updates on social media and by email about our upcoming events. Right, so moving on to today's topic, will AI change the world? Evaluating AI in the public and the private sectors. So there's no doubt that artificial intelligence is evolving at an unprecedented pace and becoming part of everyday life. Its potential is enormous, but not every application will necessarily be transformative or even beneficial. So today we'll explore how evaluators, policymakers and researchers can assess the real impacts of AI and separate the promise from the hype. So before we begin, I'll just cover a few technical points. First of all, your cameras and microphones are currently switched off by default in the Zoom webinar, but you can use the chat function at the bottom to engage in the conversation for general messages. If you have a specific question to Oliver, please use the Q&A section for questions, which we will monitor throughout and try to curate at the end. But we can also ask you to ask your questions directly by raising your hand during the question section at the end, where we can unmute your microphone, or I can take your questions and put them to Oliver as the chair. Finally, the webinar is being recorded for the UK Evaluation Society members who've registered for the event to watch on demand later, and it will be made public in a year's time. If you prefer to remain anonymous, you can use Zoom's anonymous questions feature as well. So let me now introduce our presenter, Professor Oliver Hauser. Oliver is a researcher, educator, consultant, speaker, and non-executive director with expertise in economics, leadership, and artificial intelligence. Professor Hauser is both an academic and a practitioner, with roles in the private, public, and third sectors. He's the Professor of Economics at the and Deputy Director of the Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at the University of Exeter. He's a faculty affiliate at Harvard University and also a senior advisor in the Evaluation Task Force in the UK Cabinet Office. He also advises several multinational firms, startups and charities, and has been named as one of the world's best 40 under 40 MBA professors and previously one of the top 30 under 30 thinkers. So we couldn't ask for a better speaker to guide us through the complexities of evaluating AI. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Oliver Hauser.
Thank you very much. It's a very kind introduction. Thank you, Kirsten. I'm going to start off by, well, first sharing slides to make sure that everybody can see them. So I'm going to hope that this is all right. Kirsten, if not, then please do let me know. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, but also for the kind invitation to speak today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for so many of you to join today. As Kirsten said, I'm going to talk today about a very big topic. Will AI change the world? Evaluating AI in the public and private sector. Kirsten has already done a great job in introducing sort of the different roles I have. I'm going to obviously speak today as more the academic side, right? Like I also have this role in the as a senior advisor in the evaluation task force, who I would, if you're in the public sector, I would highly recommend, please do reach out to them. They're fantastic. And I have the pleasure of working with them. They do so much good work in the UK government and in the departments to like really put evaluation at the forefront of everything that's happening. So I think that's a great resource to have. Obviously, as an academic and sort of advisor in different roles, I also will just say upfront, please, if there are any questions that you feel like we don't get to today, anytime you want, just reach out by email, which I'm going to have at the end of the presentation. The topic that I chose is obviously very, very large, so we're not going to get through every nuance of everything, but I hope I'm going to challenge you in how to think about AI after you leave this webinar today. In a way, trying to think about not just that AI is a powerful technology, which I'm going to explain a little bit sort of as a primer, what it can do, but also that I think just because something has a potential to do a lot of things, and maybe some of them good and some bad, we don't know for sure how it's going to end up. And that's where evaluating it really comes into play. Another thing I might point out right away, because you already saw on the screen like a very, sort of splashy picture and image, and a lot of the images were generated by ChatGPT. I feel like it's sometimes good to sort of see what these tools can do. So I'm playing around with that as well. So I'm curious to see what you think about how to illustrate some of the concepts that I'm going to try and bring in occasionally. All right, with that in mind, so I think we should just jump right in. What is AI all about and why is it so powerful? For some of you, how AI works and why it's very powerful is probably old news, but I know some of you might be a bit newer to this. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on explaining sort of as a primer how AI has really become sort of this powerful force in society. And we're going to start with the AI architecture, artificial intelligence. What's behind that? So the first secret is that AI or machine learning, you'll see in a second how they relate, is all about prediction. Prediction is sort of the underlying concept. And when we started, by we, I mean the field, quite a few years ago now, let's go back 20, 30 years when people started building these first algorithms. One thing to maybe think about is like what's often referred to as supervised learning. In this particular case, you can imagine you have pictures of dogs and cats and parrots and lots of other animals, and you start to label them. So you assign a label, somebody manually goes in and labels these, and you split the data that you have into a training data set. You build a model to train it to learn what kind of animal this is, a mammal, a bird, an insect, and so forth. And it gives you a prediction. A dog is a mammal, for instance. And the way you test this later, we're going to talk a bit about why this is important in the AI development world, is that you have a 20% is a test data set and you validate that. So the way you do this is you train it on this data set and you test whether it works in this data set, which the algorithm hasn't seen. And then good algorithms do a good job at predicting. So that's prediction. We're going to come back to this a lot because it's so important. I thought I'd also bring up some of the underlying algorithms that are often used in machine learning. First class is supervised learning, which I just mentioned, where you have labels. And that's how it learns over time what's classified as one or the other. Unsupervised learning, you don't do that. You don't actually go in and manually do it. You let the algorithm learn about patterns in the data, and it gives you back, for instance, groups that are sort of similar in some ways, and you can then later decide what those groups mean to you or how you might use them taking forward. You could use them for targeting, for instance, quite well. And lastly, reinforcement learning. It's basically an algorithm where the AI is playing a game, learning about the rules in which it's acting, and gets rewarded for things it does well, and things that it doesn't do well, it gets sort of less reward. And so over time, the reinforcement learning algorithm learns sort of whatever policy or kind of intervention that the AI has to optimize a certain outcome function. This is one way to look at machine learning and AI. And if you hear these terms, hopefully you get a bit of an idea what they're about. There's another way to think about this whole universe of techniques. And I think, again, while this is not a talk about AI, it's good to learn about like what some of these names and terms mean. So this big umbrella term is artificial intelligence, and it really is trying to mimic human intelligence. There's many different techniques, but probably the one that's most often used, especially when we talk about anything to do on a computer with particular, language-related topics, will be machine learning. This can also be most data can basically be broken down in some sort of like language, right? So machine learning is sort of a subsection of AI in most of these representations. Within that, you have something called neural nets, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Within that is deep learning. They're very, very similar, but deep learning has multiple layers. And within that, again, you'll have what is now obviously the latest hype, which is these large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, and a lot of other ones. So that's how much smaller it gets. There's a lot of things outside we're not going to talk about, but just to give you an idea how you might categorize these different subsets. So with that in mind, neural networks and deep learning, I thought I would just pick that one in particular because there's often this term around AI when people say it's a black box. I thought I'd quickly tell you why this is often used, this term. So for instance, again, number one thing, AI machine learning is all about prediction, right? So you look, for instance, at a number that you have up here, it's a number 9. Now, obviously, at the beginning, your algorithm doesn't know any of this. It doesn't know it's a 9, but you wanted to learn what this image is and spit out it's a number 9. So it takes a number of different, these are called nodes, and tries to sort of pick out features of this 9, whether it's the bit at the top, the bit down here, maybe the long line down there. It breaks this up into many, many different pieces. Initially, it doesn't actually know yet which ones are the right pieces to have. What it does is it actually just tries a lot of attempts. It doesn't just go from here to a number 1, 2, 3, 9. It's not very efficient to do that. Rather, it breaks it up into many different smaller pieces and has hidden layers where it will try and do this sort of adding up, a bit like Lego, like turning this into bigger building blocks and bigger ones and bigger until it gets to something. And this is the black box that people refer to. It runs through so many iterations that it learns through some of these pathways. Through here, it ends up at a 9. That's why we often say it's a black box. We usually don't observe what the hidden layers are actually doing or why they are doing it this way. It depends a lot on your training data, on the algorithm you use, the parameters you calibrate. So there's just a lot of things happening inside there. But what's important about it is that you give it an image, for instance, or something as an input, there's a certain probability it will come up with a certain output, again, about prediction. Now, again, there's so much to say about this, but I thought I'd have to mention the GPT sort of framework because it comes up so much in our everyday conversation nowadays that people use these LLMs. What they are doing is basically taking a lot of these neural nets and these deep learning algorithms and sort of put them into like sort of sequenced parts of how they learn about, say, text. Let's use text, a big corpus, right? And it breaks it down into smaller pieces. It learns about certain words, but words could be too big. So they have tokens, which are smaller than words. And it starts to learn from the existing corpus that's out there and the language that you give it about certain relationships and how these connect. What's very clever about this, which I don't have time to go into, is it learns from the context very well. So for instance, if you gave a ChatGPT, for instance, a sentence and it contains something like Harry Potter was a highly unusual boy, something else, and then it says the least favorite teacher, comma, professor, and then there's a blank. What it will do is it will learn from all of the context you've given it, basically how related these concepts are, and it will make a prediction. And again, it's important to say it's a prediction, which one of these names could actually be the most likely, or which one of the words would be most likely to follow. And if you know Harry Potter, then you're probably going to guess it's going to be Snape. But you can always see that, ChatGPT will make a prediction, and it might actually one day spit out Trelawney rather than or Quirrell, because there's a chance that it is that as well. It's not deterministic. It's always probabilistic. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to say about AI right now, because there could be so much more to say. I think I just wanted to highlight the fact that the architecture is incredibly powerful. It's incredible that these algorithms are out there, so available, and that they work on prediction. What else do you need? You need big data. There's so much you could say about big data. Just a few numbers to give you an example of just how much data we're generating every day in the internet and lots of other services around the world. It's just doubling at a super high rate very, very quickly. We need that actually to train these big algorithms. Second or third is big computing power. This one comes at a cost, maybe not to you personally right now, but to the planet and perhaps future generations, because we really, for these algorithms to be trained on billions of parameters and huge data sets, we need an incredible amount of energy. So this is from a few years ago, these numbers from 2022. And just to point out, if you look here, what they're projecting the need for this is, this was projected before the large language models hit the scene, right? ChatGPT. So we're predicting this is going to be a lot higher of how much data we need to generate, how much energy we need to deal with all of this use of AI in the future. And finally, if you put them all together, and this is something that took quite a long time for people to realize you need all of these parts, not just one at a time, then we have lots of possibilities. Now, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples because it's fun to play around with ChatGPT and show you just what bizarre stuff you can come up with in just no time. So you could generate a realistic photo of a professional, let's say woman, a businesswoman who's looking directly at the camera And you want to say a backdrop of an office, high up on a skyscraper with tall windows and a city of skyscrapers in the background. And you might get this, which is incredibly realistic. And all I've written was like 5 lines of code, not even code, 5 lines of description. You might look at this and say, well, that's sort of the person I was looking for, but really, I feel like maybe it's something else in the background. This looks maybe more like Hong Kong. I was thinking more London. Oh, well, maybe it's, not London. Now we're going to get New York. And maybe there's a bit of London there with the shard sort of example maybe in the background. You might also then say, well, I'll try something different. What if we ask ChatGPT just the same prompt, but say on a mountain? What's interesting is here, and this is quite important to, again, understand about how powerful this technique is. All I said in this prompt was that it should consider that this same businesswoman is now looking at this camera, but she's standing on a very high snowy mountain. You can see from that context and stuff I didn't even say, ChatGPT learned that it might also need to change something with the hair and the wind blowing and so forth, right? You could also say the same thing about standing at a beach. And maybe you realize that for this presentation, you don't need a businesswoman, but a businessman. And you just change the gender in the prompt, and suddenly you have a man that's standing there. It's, again, just highlighting how much is possible. You could do a lot more with this. But I do want to take away one thing. I hope you're going to take away from this, is that AI is really all about prediction based on this big data that's available and the big power that we need. So these algorithms work in tandem with that, and they make predictions about the next token, the next sentence, the next image, whatever it may be. All right, so with that in mind, let's start with that important question. If we know AI is so powerful, why don't we just adopt it? Isn't it obvious that we should just have it everywhere? I think it's really important to, first of all, distinguish that a powerful architecture or algorithm doesn't mean it's a useful one necessarily. You don't actually know whether this algorithm is going to help you in your daily life or in your firm, whether they make you more productive, happier, or creative, these algorithms. So let's consider why we don't know the answer to that, given that so many people spend so much time building AI models right now. The first thing I would say is to sort of praise a little bit our AI developers out there. They spend a lot of time perfecting these models. This is hard work, right? Like it took years and decades to get to where we are now. But when they have a model they're really proud of, or they want to test how good they are, they're going to run it by certain benchmark tests. Sometimes these are referred to as model evaluation. And with that in mind, keep that word in mind. Model evaluation may look like this. You have a bunch of benchmark tests that you have availability and that you can use and that are available to you as a developer to see how your model does compared to other models. So ChatGPT 4.0 does pretty well on a lot of these criteria. Claude 3 Opus did particularly well on this one. But if I ask you right now, what does that mean? How is that going to impact your life? The fact that ChatGPT 4.0 gets a 76.6 score on math problem solving? It's really hard to know, right? And that's this because the model evaluation is really all about optimizing the model's performance, its reliability, accuracy. And that's based on training data, the right one for that matter, the one that you need for your particular purpose. It's based on calibration, parameters, and so forth. It's about solving a particular puzzle to get these benchmark tests to get a high score on. But I want to point out that model evaluation is not the same as evaluating the impact of AI in society. And this is especially where social scientists come in, policymakers, and any leader in an organization needs to understand that difference. Just because something is said to be a really good model to do amazing stuff doesn't mean it will be amazing in practice. So why can't you just assume that it's going to work? Well, let's take the side for people who will argue that's possible. They will say AI is fast, efficient, and tireless. It has incredible memory and knowledge. It can save you time and effort and money potentially. It can detect patterns really well. It's often applicable across domains, right? It's pretty nimble in that way. It can feel personal and targeted. And as I said before, it's a powerful architecture. But why can't you assume it just works? The reason for that is that better performance just needs a lot more customization than we're used to. It's not the case that you can take ChatGPT and use it anywhere. Well, at least that's what I'm going to argue later. It's going to be hard to be useful in every context. Hallucination, bias, and selective forgetting are some of the problems that we have in our AI algorithms right now. Although they're not just problems, they're also just part of the architecture again. It often takes a while for people to get good at it, right? So even though ChatGPT is really intuitive, you hear quite different stories about how some people say it's easy to use and some say it didn't really help me. Sometimes it's very specific for certain domains. In other cases, it makes people just fearful of things that it could do, right? Like it could displace me in my job. It could replace me altogether. There's also a fear for some people that it's going to lead to downskilling, like that people don't learn certain basic skills anymore that they can use later in life or in different domains if they rely too much on some of these AI algorithms. And finally, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't really know what society is going to look like in 10 years from now when AI has become even more prevalent than it already is. Some people even have argued that there's long-term risks, like existential risks around more and more powerful AI. So I think both sides are interesting, right? You shouldn't just assume one is right or wrong. However, it's also interesting to say, could experts actually tell you who's right here? And I think they can't really. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, not about the technology, but the impact of AI on certain outcomes. Let's say, for instance, jobs. Elon Musk, obviously Tesla, X, and so forth, he have said that he thinks, for instance, the development of AI is fantastic for jobs because basically it will become optional. If you want to have a job for your personal satisfaction, go ahead, have one. You don't really need one because AI will do everything. So life will be good. Contrast, Geoffrey Hinton, who is often or has been referred to as the godfather of AI and one of the most recent Nobel laureates for his development on AI. He said, I'm very worried about AI doing a lot of these mundane jobs because it could increase productivity and wealth, but he thinks that the spoils will go to the rich and lots of people are going to be worse off. They're going to lose their jobs and society will be worse off as a whole. So you have hugely different predictions by two very prominent people in that field, right? So I don't think it's enough to just trust and ask your best friend or an expert in the field to say, what do you think is going to happen? So takeaway 2 is that even though these models are powerful, they're measured on something that I'm going to call model evaluation, where they might do very well on, but that's not the same as evaluating AI or the impact of AI specifically. So that distinction is important. What we would like to know really is not that AI does really well on a bunch of benchmark tests. We want to know, will AI or LLMs make you more creative and more productive in your work? We want to know, will it help us identify and prevent fraudulent behavior, for instance, if you're a big government department that needs to watch out for fraud or a credit card insurance company? Will AI identify top talent in recruitment and for promotions? This is something that so many HR departments are asking themselves right now. As you get more and more applicants with AI written cover letters, can they use AI to help them with this problem? Or can AI make you a better manager? Like maybe you personally, or maybe you want your manager to become better at managing and developing you, right? This is another question that often comes up in organizations. This is just a handful of them, and there's so many more. I would say AI has the potential to have a meaningful impact on these outcomes. But will it deliver? That's the big question, right? So in practice, I think people look at this and say, well, I think AI has that. I think either I'm in a camp that believes it or I don't. And in practice, I often see sort of a typical thing that happens is that usually someone very senior, a senior leader in an organization, a CEO, or somebody very early in the adoption cycle of this technology gets excited about this and says, we want to be an organization that leads the way with AI, whether that's in the public or the private sector. It does take someone with both the vision and the authority to say, we're going to go forward with this. Now, first of all, let me say you do need someone who's visionary when it comes to something like AI. It's a new technology. It's a lot of unknowns. Somebody needs to take this big step forward and say, we're going to do this. But often what happens next is obviously someone goes out, maybe the boss themselves or somebody around them, and they look at all of the tools that are out there. And let's just say that the claims about them are just incredible. Like apparently AI can do anything these days. So this is it's going to impress you pretty easily, especially when you've seen some of the demonstrations. It just looks wonderful. So maybe you've chosen one of these AI tools, and the next thing that happens is, because you've just invested a lot of money, it just rolled out right away to everybody. Usually we don't think much about that process. That seems like a natural thing to do. Procurement takes a while anyway, so might as well, once we finally have the thing, we might as well roll it out to everybody. But it leaves open this question, whether we actually know if this works. Are we just impressed by a good sales pitch, or do we know it works in our organization, in our context? For whom does it work, and where does it work better or worse potentially? So I think the just do it mentality, I think, runs into, and this is a problem that both public and private sector have, by the way. When I talk to either and or, it's kind of interesting that they think they are the only ones. Like, they all say, oh, the tech firms have figured it out. But I'll show you later in a little bit, the tech firms also don't have a full answer to this either yet. So AI feels like it's here and it's a big hype, so everyone's excited about it, including the CEO, which is often what you need to get things off the ground, right? So if you have the CEO's attention, you go out and you get a tool, but you don't really know which tool or what it's really meant to do. Sometimes I see companies fall back on ChatGPT and ask for a license that just keeps their data private in there, but they hope that having it available to employees will automatically lead to better outcomes. And those outcomes are sometimes not even specified. But one thing that's happened so much is that people feel like they need to act now, otherwise they're going to be sort of falling behind. It's sort of the equivalent of the organizational FOMO that teenagers have, I guess. So what do you do in that case? One recommendation, and it isn't just for AI, one recommendation I have, a principle you should probably adopt if you're new to this, is that especially when there's uncertainty that's high, the risks are large, or the costs are very high, your best way forward is to evaluate what you're doing. Now, as I said, it's not just AI. I'm talking about evaluating AI today, but I think this concept of proportionate evaluation applies to any policy or program or any major change in your organization that you do anyway. You kind of want to know, does this thing work? You're investing so much money into it, and often it's a huge uncertainty around where it's going to land. So my advice is evaluate. If you're new to our evaluation, just so you know what that is, it's a systematic assessment of the design, implementation, and outcomes of a policy or program, in this case, AI. You could develop a theory here. I would definitely encourage that this doesn't, so you should have some plan, I guess you could call it. Theory is maybe a fancy word for it, but it's often called a theory of change. And if you're more sort of academically and economics leaning, then you might want to do mathematical theory, but you really don't have to. All you have to think about is, where do we start, where do we want to get to, and how are we going to get there? I'll show you a slide in a minute. Ask questions. What is this going to do? For whom? For what context? Figure out where do you really think it's going to make a difference, and then design your evaluation. You'll hear me talk a lot about randomized control trials in this talk. I very much push for that, and you'll see in a second why I think it's particularly important here. But there's other methods as well. It could be quasi-experimental designs, whether it's RDDs or instrument variable, diff and diff. There's so many things. Collect the data and analyze the data. Make sure to isolate the impact of that change, which would be AI in this case. Like, how do you figure out what AI actually did on the outcome variable you care about? And see if that data that you have matches your theory. And ultimately, that's when you finally arrive at a point to figure out, we have this AI, we've found out what it does, and now we can actually make a decision about, should we roll this out to everybody or some people? So the whole point of this exercise of evaluation is to figure out, what should we do to make better decisions? What should we know? What do we need to know to make better decisions going forward? So when uncertainty, risks, or costs are high, definitely evaluate. That's the recommendation here. All right. So again, for some of you, this may be old news. If it is, then you can look away for a second. If not, then think about what a theory of change is. It sounds very complicated. I found this sort of depiction of it quite nice online, so I put it here. It's quite easy actually if you think about it. You have a problem, right? You figure out what resources do you need to address this. What are your inputs, whether it's time, money, resources, and your AI tool, for instance, who's going to deliver it, and so forth. You think about what the activities are that you're going to roll out to make this a success. What outputs are you going to generate? And then ultimately, what long-term impact are you going to try and generate from this, and how are you going to measure that? So you can draw this any way you want, but you should do some thinking beforehand. That's pretty obvious, but I'm surprised very often how often people don't do it. They don't come away from a conversation about AI saying, I have the answers to these questions. They rather often say, we need to do this because it's happening. And I think that's probably jumping too far if you just go ahead and buy something without figuring out if it's going to solve a problem. So before you pick your tool, make sure you have the answer to the following questions. What do you actually want to achieve? What's the target behavior you care about? And what's the target outcome that you really want to achieve? If you're in a company and you have a sales team, think about the behaviors they're doing. Maybe it's the number of calls, and you think an AI tool is going to help them make more calls. And the outcome is going to be better sales figures. That's pretty clear. If you understand that the AI tool you're purchasing or developing is going to help you with that, that's a step further than many organizations have seen and go, because it's so easy to forget about that important first step. And think about through what mechanisms it might work, right? I'm not going to go into that detail too much, but I call something like a mechanism experiment where we figure out, like, is it actually pulling at the right levers? Once you have answers to these questions, now we can start talking about the AI tool actually. Now we can say, can a generic tool do what we want it to do? Is ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini the right thing to do for us right now? Or do we need something more customized? This is actually quite easy often nowadays with these big platforms. They allow you to customize your GPT based on certain context and data that you have, or within a certain, sort of protected sphere, basically, for only your organization. Or you might just need to build something from the ground up. If it's something very specialized, maybe you need to have a custom build. You can still have access to the foundation model, but you need sort of in-house data scientists and AI developers to help you build that. Once you have your AI tool, now is the time to evaluate, to pick your evaluation method. I would highly recommend an RCT. It's by far the simplest way to analyze whether your AI actually had an impact later. This comes, if you're in a sort of public sector or private sector, you may have heard about the behavioral insights team. They do a lot of work and have illustrated this many different ways. Here's one of them, where you just have a population of interest, employees or citizens, and you randomly assign them into two groups, and one group receives the intervention and the other one doesn't. And after a while, you measure the outcome that you're interested in, like performance, for instance, or anything else that you're particularly interested in. All right, so this is where I wanted to say why I care so much about RCTs in this context, because I think when we talk about AI, it's actually really quite easy to do an RCT. A lot of RCTs, when they're done in a large-scale sort of setting in organizations or in society where they have to deliver something in person, and it's a very costly intervention, they can be sometimes a bit harder to pull off. It's still entirely possible, but people sometimes shy away from the complexity of that. I don't think that's true when it comes to AI. These digital innovations are actually kind of perfectly built for that. You have a digital platform, a website or something in front of you, or an intranet where you can vary who sees what. The simplest version of this is just an A/B test, right? A is to control what you've always been doing, and B is your new AI version of that. But why don't we do it? Why doesn't it happen all the time? The best explanation, I think, why people don't evaluate things in general, I think, is optimism bias. We tell ourselves our ideas are pretty darn great. We just know, right? Like if I have an idea and I spend a lot of time thinking about this, I know it's going to work. So why evaluate it? Like I'm so convinced by the fact that this is going to work. The worst I could find out is that I may have been wrong, right? That's not so nice for most of us to realize maybe some of our ideas are not going to create the benefit that we thought. Then the more difficult version of this is also that we actually pretty often probably underestimate that some things could backfire. And when they backfire, we should really evaluate to make sure we avoid harm. We think it's going to do something good. It could also harm some people, or maybe on average people. So really important to also think about that you're doing this to not always improve things, but just make sure you're testing something so that you don't make things worse by accident. Some people worry about the evaluation takes time and resources, but it could be very well spent. Like if you invest so much money in an AI tool, finding out that it doesn't work for you could save you a lot of money for the next 5 to 10 years where you don't spend time and money on that in the future. The other bit that I think contributes to why people don't evaluate AI is because they think it's been done by the company. And I think that's the misunderstanding about model evaluation, which is not the same thing as evaluation of AI impact, right? And of course, I'm going to partly blame some of the misleading sales claims that we hear on the internet everywhere about like what AI can do already for us and how wonderful it is in every way. So with that in mind, AI innovations, I think, are a natural, good friend and a partner for RCTs or A/B tests. So really, really think about doing your RCT if you can. Now, some of you who are not new to evaluation might say, isn't this just standard evaluation advice? If you're familiar with any of this, so if you're in a public sector, you have almost certainly heard about the Magenta book. Fantastic advice, excellent resource to go to learn about evaluation. If you're sort of either in the public sector initially, but also in the private sector, sort of in between, there's certainly the behavioral insights team that's owned by Nesta now, has the test, learn, adapt framework, also very popular, very well known. And I'm going to tell myself that at least one person, hopefully on this call, may have heard about a business experiment, which a colleague and I at Harvard published many years ago now, about very much an RCT basically. And this is sort of aimed at private organizations who maybe are a little less familiar with RCTs that have actually started to be used in the public sector a lot more than in some private sector domains. So, any of those are probably good resources to look into. They're sort of a good entryway. But just to say, there really is a lot of similarity between them. So I'm not saying that you have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of the things we know about evaluation will apply to evaluating AI. But I also think there's some things that are quite nuanced and different. First of all, AI is sort of evolving fairly fast and self-learning. Second, there are so-called hallucinations or general prediction errors that can happen. Third, there are distributional effects that arise from the AI and how it's designed to work. And fourth, there are public attitudes and perceptions that are worth very much keeping in mind when it comes to AI. Let's talk about the first one first. So evolving self-learning AI. Now, AI development is really, really fast at the moment. It's just every day they're developing something new and cool. So it's happening very quickly and often undetected. It's being updated in the model that you're using. You might not be aware of it. They might not tell you because they're just pushing the next level of the code into the public domain after some testing internally. Which means if AI worked really well one day here, it might work completely differently tomorrow because the code will have changed in the background and fairly quickly too. Furthermore, because AI tools are sort of like built to like learn from user behavior, sometimes in real time, they can learn over time and adjust their outputs. So what happened on one day may not happen on the second day in the same way. And finally, there's the user response. People might get used to what AI tells them, and they might adjust their usage too. So the one-time snapshot isn't really that representative. The consequence of this is for both the leaders of an organization who care about vision of AI in their organization, as well as the people evaluating whether this works, is that a one-off test probably won't do. This may have been enough in a policy that is not very changing over time, but it's probably going to be much harder to justify with AI. So what I would recommend is conduct iterative and regular cycles of evaluation. Plan ahead. Plan ahead, especially because you can already build in an RCT from the start, right? Like I said before. So if you can do that, then you can regularly check in and make sure that your AI is actually delivering, even if the AI tool is changing over time or learning, you still know when it works the best or what sort of benefit you have from it at each point. The second point was about hallucinations and prediction errors. So this goes back to the very first thing I said about AI, that the fact that it's working on this basis of prediction, which means there are always probabilities, not deterministic. It's not like one thing will always lead to another. There's probabilities happening in the background, lots of matrix multiplications that mean that these errors and hallucinations that we have heard about, they are sort of the result, an inevitable result of the way the architecture works. They have benefits. They lead to certain outcomes not being fully replicable, but on the other hand, also a bit more diversity, a bit of change. And so that is actually both a feature and a bug of the technology. What's really important is that when we trust AI with decision making in any context, we should be aware that someone has to take responsibility for that, right? And so we have to accept when AI makes mistakes, and we have to learn governance around this to make sure that if the AI makes a mistake, we know who's responsible for this and how we're going to react to such mistakes. It also means, in my opinion, when the stakes are really high, you can't, it goes back to regularly conducting these RCTs and testing your AI, and you might sometimes just go back to the old-fashioned way and include these human decision makers to validate whether your AI is making more mistakes or avoidable mistakes that humans wouldn't make. So you can go back to the model developers and help them improve their model. Right? So mistakes are inevitable eventually. Just make sure you catch them and you learn from them and make the AI better. The third point that's different is that AI is very customizable, right? And targeting. It feels very personal and friendly if you've ever used the LLMs. But because AI is all about this prediction, right, these errors will happen here too. And that could happen, and this is quite important, obviously, for groups who are underrepresented in the training data. So if you're a small subgroup and your AI doesn't have much training data, but is later trying to target or appeal to this demographic, it might just have more variation, more variance, and maybe more error. So this could be particularly detrimental for vulnerable populations. One that comes to mind is obviously older people who are just not as much on the internet, right? Potentially. And so if they are not, then there's less training data available for them. But if you're a company or a public sector that interacts with older people a lot, you need to be aware of that, right? It could really have distributional effects that are completely unexpected. So definitely make sure to study effects of AI on certain subgroups that you want to be particularly sensitive to. That also means sometimes you want to try to run trials, RCTs, on those subgroups and do more sophisticated analyses on them to make sure that there's no harm being done by accident because AI is trying to do something that you're not fully aware of by using this technology that's in the background and available to it. And fourth, what's different about it? I think that when it comes to new technology, there's always some skepticism. That's been, quite normal for a long time. And some fears will be warranted and some will be overblown. That's also quite normal, right? We're just not very good at knowing what the future will hold until it happens. But I do think these attitudes matter for the long run. I think one mistake by an AI, particularly in the public sector, can have really long-term negative effects on, for instance, trust in government or public institutions. And if you're in the private sector, then I think there's good reason to believe that if an AI makes a mistake that influences an employee's career outcomes, they will be not happy with the company's leadership. So we need to measure these attitudes. We need to make sure we understand how people feel about this, understand who's adopting these AI and who's not, and how those people are different and why they do that, right? And we need to run additional RCTs again, I think, where we measure and vary the exposure that people have to AI, make it more salient to them and less, and figure out who's taking this up. And if people don't, help them to train on it and make sure that you don't feel excluded from this. If you use any surveys to study the perceptions about AI, make sure you're aware of the self-selection element here, right? If you send out a survey that says, tell us everything you love about AI, you're going to get a lot of self-selection. So if you send out surveys, be careful that you don't invite just one group of people. All right, so there's a lot in here. There were 4 points that I hope you're going to remember. So if you're evaluating AI, the standard book on evaluation is a really good starting point, and there's more evaluation guidance coming in the future. But just to sort of reiterate what I think is important and different about AI is the fact that you need to evaluate the evolving technology itself, the errors it might produce, the subgroups, in particular vulnerable groups that might be impacted, and the people's perceptions around AI in general, right? To make sure that you're sort of understanding where people are at before you just roll things out. All right. We started off by talking about the models, right? And AI. And I said, model evaluation won't give you an answer to some of these questions that we're looking at here. Will AI make you more creative and more productive? Or will it help us identify fraudulent behavior, for instance? So I'm going to give you a little bit of what I think is some evidence already out there, because I think, it's good to also see where we have done some trials, whether they are sort of more lab studies all the way to like field studies. So I'll start with this one, because the work, some work that I've done with a colleague at UCL, Anil Doshi, and he and I started early on when ChatGPT was just sort of really becoming popular. We asked ourselves, will this make people more creative or less? And I like using this example because it's sort of a fundamental bit about our human nature that we like, right? That we're creative. That's sort of uniquely human. So will AI make us more creative or maybe less? There's different theories that might pull you in different directions. I'm going to tell you where we end up in the end on this. So first of all, I'll tell you what we did. We ran an online study where we had people assigned to either a no AI condition or one with one AI prompt or up to 5. And we just asked them to write a story about having an adventure on a different planet, for instance, or in the jungle, I think, or in the open sea. So they had to write a little story, not very difficult. It was short. And they assigned, like I said, either not having any AI, or they could click a button, very simple. It said, like, give me an idea for a story from AI, or 5 buttons, and all 5 were then available to them to see at the same time. So we took this, and what we find, just to cut to the chase, because obviously I want to spend too much time on any one paper here, we had other readers evaluate them, 600 of them, and we found that on average, people thought it was a bit more creative, right? Like novel and sort of measures that we have taken from psychology literature on creativity. Other people think 5 to 8 percentage points more creativity. Better written, more enjoyable, less boring, and more of a surprising twist. So I could stop here and you might go away saying, great, AI improves our creativity, wonderful. But I don't think it's that easy. We also look at subgroups. We look at the people who are at baseline, very creative. We have sort of a measure of how creative are they without any AI, just their sort of trait. There's very creative people and there's people who are not very creative. And so we look at which of those groups benefits more from AI. And you can have a quick guess in your mind, who do you think would be benefiting more from this? So I'll give you a second or two to think about this. And now I'll tell you the answer, which is it was the group that is not very creative to start with. So it turns out when we look at who benefits from this technology at the moment, it's not at all very creative people. They actually haven't been pushed beyond. Whether they have access to AI or not, it's always the same outcome for them. They're very creative to start with. Their stories are better. But non-creative people, the gap is sort of erased by having AI available. So that's one interesting thing. But the other thing, and that's a big but potentially for us as a society, is when we look at not what people evaluate the stories to be, but we look at what is the similarity of stories that they have produced, we can look at that within each condition. So people with no AI or had access to AI, one of the two conditions. And we find that once you have access to AI, the diversity of ideas, the output that they produce gets smaller. And that seems to be the case because people sort of get anchored to whatever ChatGPT gives them back, right? And the reason for this is, like I said, it's a prediction machine. It'll always produce something fairly similar, not always the exact same thing because it's not deterministic, but on average kind of the same. So it might actually reduce how much variance we have in society, right? So if this is our distribution of ideas, then a lot of the training data comes from the middle. That's just where most available data is there, right? So if that's something you put into the machine also gives you a lot more of that out. But in society, we do care about the outliers as well. So people who are really unusual and different. Now, just let me say that in our study, we didn't have the Mozarts in there and some other people here that are sort of the best, maybe. We also had some who are worse. But the point is that we often need a diversity of novelty, of difference to even have new ideas in society, coming around. So with that in mind, this was one of our findings early on. We had a few studies that replicated ours in other more field settings. And then the other thing that's maybe quite interesting to see is this was in the domain of creativity. But what about productivity? And it turns out a lot of similarities emerge, both from lab studies and with field studies and consultants where they have been randomly assigned to have access to AI or not. The average productivity usually goes up a bit and the time to completion decreases, but it's usually the least productive people that benefit the most, not really the ones who are very productive to start with. The performance increases most for routine tasks, but unfortunately not for stuff that's what's outside the AI frontier, as some people call it. In fact, there's a paper by Delacroix et al. That finds that outside things that AI is sort of like designed for, it actually decreases your performance. And most likely, again, it's because you're given an idea, a help from an AI, but it may actually be worse potentially, right? So you get anchored to that and you produce less good outcomes. So in these domains, why the reason I chose both creativity and performance, not because they are necessarily the same, but because they show similar trends we're starting to observe. First of all, we have some benefits. AI, when we evaluate it carefully, delivers some benefits. There's also some notable downsides, so you really want to think about carefully. But the point is, more generally, without any proper evaluation, like in RCT, we would have not known either. We would have just rolled it out and hoped for the best. So I think these trade-offs it's important we understand them to lead to informed decision making. And I also think understanding how AI works creates more trust that we are going to use AI in responsible ways in society, in organizations, and so forth. As a researcher, I obviously care about the fact that we also learn more from this by doing this, right? We're learning as a collective, which means we have new hypotheses where we think it could work better next time, and we have new opportunities to test them in our CTs and trials. So the takeaway here is that good evaluations of AI, they highlight two things, the outcomes you care about, but potentially trade-offs as well, right? You need to know both for a good sort of benefit cost analysis if you want. I've talked a lot about how AI is sort of a very powerful tool. I've talked about how, we have sort of frameworks for evaluation and how they might be different in AI. And I've also talked a lot about like these examples that I just gave about how AI, especially in this case, LLMs, right? Sort of these chat interactions seem to lead to some outcomes, good and bad, basically, creativity, productivity, and others. One thing I wanted to get to, that's sort of a fundamental question that we sometimes get is AI alone enough to change behavior? And the reason I bring this up is because we sort of have to divorce in our minds what AI does and what we often think AI does. First of all, if your inbox is anything like mine, it kind of goes like this. I have a bunch of emails that come in that say things like, this AI tool will make your workforce 40% faster, or it will make you hire faster and more accurately. And your AI will reply to all of your emails overnight. I've not received the last one yet. I'm just waiting for that to happen one day. I wish that would actually work, but I'm just saying the claims are incredible, right? Like apparently it can do anything. But in reality, we have to sort of think about what's the AI bit in everything they are selling us in these products. The tools that are available have something that's AI in there. Remember, that's just prediction. It's super powerful prediction, but in its own right, the prediction doesn't lead to behavior change. What can lead to behavior change is how the AI bit in the thing that you're looking at interacts with the rest of the tool. And how do people respond to the AI prediction when it's packaged in a certain tool with a certain intervention? I'll give you an example from the public sector that I wanted to get to here because I think it separates the two parts quite nicely and tells you how we can test whether AI adds actual sort of value in a setting where you might want to use it. So if you're a public sector organization, like for instance, the one we were working with, this is in New Mexico, in the US, they were interested in unemployment benefit claimants. They had to fill out a form, not actually on paper anymore, usually online, and they wanted to make sure there is no fraudulent behavior. We're going to use machine learning and AI to predict who people's future behavior in this not exercise, the actual portal that they're using to submit claims, right, and ask for money from the government. We're going to use these predictions to identify who in that moment is likely to commit fraud. And we're going to then use behavioral science to design some messages to deter fraud. Just to say, these are preventative measures, not punitive. So we want to not like, if you've ever seen the movie Minority Report, where they like crash through the window and arrest people before they have done a crime, we're definitely not doing that. We're just trying to nudge people in the direction of being more honest. And so we're going to use an RCT to evaluate and learn whether this works and for whom. The context for this is, like I said, the New Mexico Department of Workforce Solutions and, a wonderful collaborator, Mike Green at Deloitte, who really was sort of the driving force behind all of this, the data science implementation, which is a huge project for such a big public sector organization. And the context for this was, like I said, the unemployment benefits that people have to claim. And one particular part of this that's really important in whether you get the unemployment insurance, the money, is the weekly certification. So you go into this online platform and you fill out a bunch of things, but one notable question is the question, did you work last week? Kind of looks like this in the old format. It's been updated since, but it sort of had this question. And if you didn't work, then you say no. That's good. Then the government knows you didn't work. You're probably eligible given your other answers to this question, to this survey, and then you get your money. If you did work, you have to declare that, and depending on how much you earned, your benefits go down a bit, right? But we want to make sure people honestly fill out this question. Because if they don't fill it out honestly, well, it's bad for everybody. Government has to go out and run after them and get the money back. They get penalized, and it's just not pretty for anybody. But of course, some people, they might not be on purpose fraudulent. They might just simply make a mistake a little bit under the time pressure and the financial situation they're in, right? So ideally, we can intervene before they make a mistake here. Just to say, improper payments, as they're often called in this context, are very, very large, like 2 billion or more a year in the US alone, and it's grown since COVID a lot. So how do we do? First of all, phase one, we build an algorithm. By we, I mean Mike and his team did a fantastic job here. They trained an algorithm on the available data that they had to predict whether someone is more or less likely to, in any given week when they come to the platform, that they would commit fraud. And we find that the algorithm does reasonably well. It does on the far right, when you have a higher score of this RAR, risk assessment result decile. If you're up here, you're considered a high risk claimant. If you're down here, much less likely to be a risk category. Let me just stop right here and say you probably now hopefully know that what I've just shown you is quite familiar. It's model evaluation. We haven't changed any behavior. We don't know yet if this tool is going to do any good yet. All we know is we have a good model, reasonably good model, that finds out from the existing data who's likely to commit fraud in the future. So we know who these people are. But do we actually know if they're going to change behavior if we do something to them? Or maybe, what if we got it a bit wrong in our algorithm? And the people at the bottom here on this end, maybe they also have something to declare, and our algorithm just isn't very good, right? So we don't know yet. So what we want to find out is, are we targeting the right people, and how do we just get them to disclose more honestly whether they had income or not? So in phase two, which is the evaluation of the impact of AI and the treatments, we're doing an impact evaluation through a large RCT. And we have a bunch of messages that we show people just before they fill out this question that I showed you before. If you're familiar with the Behavioral Insights team, then this will be very familiar. So this wasn't part of the Behavioral Insights team, but it's the typical Behavioral Insights sort of messages you might use. Just as one example, the social norm here is 9 out of 10 people in this county report their earnings accurately. If you work between this period, please ensure you report these earnings. So very standard behavioral science, if you wish. And then we had another treatment where we vary this message over time in case if you come back multiple weeks. And so I'm not going to show you all of these prompts because they've been used many times before, or variations thereof, and we don't have too much time. But just so you know, this is the actual treatment that people will see that based on behavioral science. First of all, I would say that if you didn't have AI, what would you do? You would show it to everybody, right? Either you would show it to everybody and roll it out, but then you have no evaluation, or you would at least randomly assign people to a control group without a message, or to a treatment group with a message. If you did that in an RCT style, you would find that the control and treatment are not significantly different. So it turns out if you compare the two lines here, or bars if you wish, if you had them as bar graphs, then across all of the population of claimants, there's no difference in seeing the message or not. Now you might ask, does that mean it failed? And the answer is no. We did sort of a version of a theory of change beforehand, and we didn't expect everybody's impacted by this. Only the high-risk claimants should respond to the treatments because they're the ones who probably have something to disclose according to our algorithm, our AI. Whereas the low-risk claimants, according to the AI, are already being honest, right? So with that in mind, let's look on the x-axis at people who are considered less likely to commit fraud and people who are predicted by our AI to be more likely. And what we find is, if you're a low-risk claimant at the far end here, whether you see a message or not doesn't make any difference. And that's true here and here and here. People who are lower risk are equally likely to declare that they had something to declare in the first place. But that makes sense. Our algorithm picked that out. The big question is what happens in the fifth, in the highest groups. And we find that in the highest groups, people who are exposed to the treatment are much more likely to disclose that they had earnings. And that gives us a lot of confidence for two things. First, we have learned that our algorithm in phase 1 is pretty good at predicting claimants. And in fact, it actually, later we show, did a good job at identifying them and then changed behavior through the prompts. But the algorithm alone didn't change behavior. It was only when we combined it with an actual treatment, delivering something like a nudge message, or could be something else, right? It could have been more audits or something like that. All of that could have been used as a treatment. But we find that only the high-risk claimants respond to the treatment. And that tells us that both the AI algorithm added value at the right place where it was meant to, and the message has added value for the high-risk claimants. So that's a nice way to combine the power of AI and prediction, and it separates out what AI does, it predicts, and it separates what changes behavior, which is any intervention, whether it's a message or it's audits or it's authority figures, whatever you may want to use. And finally, we're going to get to the end of the presentation in just a second here. I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why I think that we're not doing enough yet in that direction. And that's because there's a lot of unexamined assumptions in the background. And so I'll tell you one thing that I often hear from people who are very enthusiastic about AI or any technology. They'll say, it's obvious. What I've just shown you is obvious. Of course it will happen. And again, it goes back to optimism bias. They say it will be a good thing. The technology, the AI will be used for a good thing. And perhaps they're right? I mean, they could be completely right, but I do think they're making some big assumptions. First of all, when it comes to AI or any technology, they're assuming people will use it when it's offered to them. Second, when it's offered to them, when it is offered and they use it, they will use it in a responsible and ethical way, in a way that you want them to use it. And lastly, they are also assuming what they've seen in one part of it with a small user group of a focus group of 10 people will apply at scale, whether that's an organization of 10,000 people or 100,000 people or all of society, and that those things work without having negative side effects. And so let's examine that quickly. Adoption. Just to say adoption, there have already been some really interesting studies on this in the field. One that I've picked out by Dewey et al. Is one where he had GitHub Copilot rolled out in an RCT sort of way to developers who are writing code. And one of the organizations was Microsoft, actually. So you would think these are, first of all, they're very used to AI tools because they're building them. What they found is that, and they did it at Centa and then a financial firm as well. But what they found is really interesting. And I'm not going to focus on the productivity effects, which they report as well. I'll focus on the adoption. When they initially rolled this out in the treatment group, so they had a control and a treatment, they found only 8%, 8.5% of people actually took it up. So it turns out, even though it was a super powerful tool available, only 8.5% took it up in an organization that is clearly at the forefront of the technology, right? So you would think they should all take it up, but they didn't. It took multiple attempts again to get them engaged, and it landed around 40%, I think, of people ended up using it regularly, or at least once. Like really fairly low. If you think about adoption in an area where it's like really potentially really helpful, this tool, Copilot for coding, 40% in a technology firm is not universal by any means, right? So I think that is really important to keep in mind. Even in domains where you think people should take it up, they may not do that. The second related point to adoption is that it could lead to unequal adoptions among subgroups again. There's emerging evidence from a bunch of papers that show that there are gender differences. Men are much more likely to adopt AI than women. And there's different reasons for this that people hypothesize and have tried to test. Sometimes it's been suggested in contexts where it's sort of performance-based, that women think it's unethical to use it, whereas men don't seem to have that problem. So really important to think about adoption. Second, will people use AI for good? I think the jury is out on that because I think we don't have enough governance and frameworks yet to really figure out what is good, what's good use, what's ethical use and responsible use. And I think that this is something where organizations and governments have to come in and set up guardrails to think about what is it that we want people to do, where do we allow it to happen and where don't we? For instance, if you look at universities, there's a big question about whether we should allow students to have access to AI during exams or homework. And so I think the jury's out on a lot of questions about what's responsible use of AI if you get them to adopt it in the first place. And finally, and this is sort of pulling together a bunch of loose strings that we've talked about so far, scaling up, like what is it that we want to achieve in the long term? We want some sort of equilibrium where we have good availability of AI that does a lot of good, right? We want to have AI that creates value. But I think it's really important to remember, just because it could create value doesn't mean it could not also destroy value. There's a bunch of different ways this could happen. One of them is the obvious one that I mentioned before around what I would call a social dilemma. And this is often the case in these AI adoption problems. If you think about the creativity example I gave, individually, you had an incentive to use AI because your story is on average more likely to get evaluated a bit more creatively. Whereas if everyone did that, if everyone uses AI, then we might risk losing creativity and diversity of ideas as a whole in society, right? That would be the bad downside, the social dilemma, the negative externality, as economists call it. But there's other ways that this could happen as well. If we all start using it for everything, we might end up having too much usage of energy, and that will lead to destruction of the planet, more emissions. And even if we try to use it for things that are particularly good, like solving climate change, the irony would be if we use so much AI that it decreases what we can do for the planet and climate. So I think what's really important as sort of like a way to summarize these questions around here is, are we asking the right questions? Like, first of all, on adoption, can we run RCTs to prompt more thoughtful adoption of AI and among subgroups where it's equally distributed and leads to equal opportunities? Can we steer, when people use RCTs, can we steer them in the right direction, whether it's citizens, employees, leaders, so that they use it for good? How do we build the guardrails for safe and responsible use? Like, what do we actually allow and where do we say is a red line for usage, whether it's in the workplace, at home, wherever it may be? And how do we ensure that using AI leads to upskilling and not downskilling? This idea that it's great to be versatile and clever and tech savvy with the newest technology. I get that, but we need to make sure that there are certain basic skills we don't forget teaching the next generation as well. So that's a balance. And the consideration for scaling up that I mentioned before, what if everyone used this for their own benefit? Are we losing out collectively? This social dilemma that I mentioned. So that means to me that in any given context, we need to really ask ourselves, are the benefits we're accruing from using AI in this context, are they worth the potential loss at the collective level? It may well be. It may be that we're saying this is so good for our company or society that we're using AI that yes, some cost to the collective, whatever that may be, is something that's inevitable. Maybe we have to accept that, but we really have to think about that carefully. And lastly, I think sort of to flip that on its head, right? Like if we have cases where people really use it a lot and you're thinking you have to do it because otherwise you're falling behind, ask yourself, if everyone's using it, what's your competitive advantage? So I think we're going to end up in a really interesting equilibrium where some AI use is going to create benefits and we need to focus on those. But if everyone's using it too much, then the benefits kind of usually get lost, right? So it's going to be a trade-off between the two. So my last takeaway for you is that we need to evaluate both the AI adoption, the use, and how it's going to be done at scale. We're pretty much exactly an hour in, so I want to make sure we're leaving enough time for some questions. These are the takeaways. I'm not going to read all of them out now. I hope that for many of you this was interesting. I think I'm going to leave with a call to action before we go to questions, because it's my last chance that I can say this. There are so many unanswered questions in the public sector, in the organizations. I'm not going to list them all, but more broadly, I just want to know, can we get more high-quality evaluations of the impact of AI out there? Can we achieve effective, responsible human-AI collaboration? And if that is something you're excited about, then I really think, please do help. Help if, depending on what role you have, in a different way. If you're a leader of an organization right now, go beyond sharing a vision. Vision is great, we need that, but inspire your team to also evaluate those AI tools across the firm, the government, the public, whatever it may be. If you're an AI developer, then maybe try your best to go beyond model evaluation. That's step one, that's phase one, but go further and evaluate the impact of AI on actual behavior. And if you're a social scientist or evaluator, many people I think in this audience today are, offer your evaluation expertise to people and colleagues, your econometric skills, your RCT skills, whatever they may be, and your qualitative skills, if that's your competitive advantage. Because I really think this is a revolution that's happening in society right now, and we really need to get to the front of this to make sure we're all benefiting from this, and it needs clever people with a lot of experience and social issues to help us with this technology revolution. And if you think in any of this I can help, then please do reach out. I think it's an important social issue that we can tackle together. And if we get this right, I genuinely believe we can have AI change the world for the better. Kirsten, I think we're going to questions now. I wanted to make sure we do announce that we have another speaker coming in January. So maybe I'll just do that quickly, right? But then we can go back to the question itself. I just want to say that thank you for coming today. I hope this was interesting, what I shared with you. And like Kirsten was saying earlier, that we are having a fantastic lineup of speakers coming up. The first one is Iyad Rahwan, who is a professor in Germany and the director of the Center for Humans and Machines. And he's going to talk about AI, morality, and ethics. So how AI shapes human morality. So mark your calendars for this, and there'll be more announcements from this. We're very excited to have this started. So please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have about today or the future of this. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions now. Thank you. Oh, Kirsten, I think we can't hear you right now. Sorry. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Nope, I can't hear you.
Oh, it sounded like it crackled then a bit, and then.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep, we can.
Okay, I'll take my headset off. I'm not sure why it suddenly stopped working. Thank you so much, Oliver. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. And there's been a lot of conversation going on in the chat, which demonstrates how much people are interested in it. I've tried to sort of collate a few questions for you. If anybody would like to ask a question live, do raise your hand. And whilst people are thinking about whether they want to do that, though, I'm going to start with a question that started coming up right at the beginning because of the images that you used as examples to help us see how AI can create different things. And it's a question around how AI balances, sort of takes account of bias. So I think it was obvious that quite a lot of the images were of white people of a particular build and of a particular beauty standard. So there was lots of discussion about bias in the conversation. So I'd like to ask, how does AI deal with bias, especially because it's probabilistic instead of deterministic? And I think if we could just push that into the area of evaluation, I think the question that in my mind as an evaluator is then how do we make sure that different voices are heard when you're thinking about how we evaluate the impact of AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and get to the heart of some of the problems we're going to face, I think, with this technology, because it is incredibly powerful when it works, right? But it's very subtle sometimes in how it works, and we might not all realize it. I mean, this is a very perceptive audience, I guess, to realize this. So first of all, I would say it's a lot about prompting. If you're not careful about your prompting, it will lead to some bias. And often that bias tends to be male skewed, although not as much as it used to be. There were earlier problems with that. There was also a lot of racist sort of like output that was very quickly identified and has since been toned down, but there's still sort of a much more likely bias that it will have in there. I think part of it, by the way, comes from the personal use of this. So one of the things I would say is I prompt it very often to be gender balanced, or when I don't see it do that, I do that on purpose. So you may have seen this in some of the prompts that I've given. Although I didn't show the prompts, but certainly like in when I prompt that. Diversity of ethnicity, much harder. It turns out AI struggles with that a lot more, I think. I also think that I'm probably not as good yet at prompting all of the things to make sure it does get a diverse variation in there. So I think that one of the things that I think will just depend on how people use it is that they get trained to do it well, right? So I like using some of these images because it sort of gets me to learn more about this tool. And every time I use it, it changes it a little bit, right? So sometimes I'm surprised that it is a bit more diversity output, and sometimes I'm shocked it is not at all. So I think exactly the people have pointed out that, for instance, racial diversity may be missing in this one. It's probably one of the some of the pictures I've pulled recently that's fallen out of it. So I think that one of the things that I would need to go back is train it. I think it highlights exactly the problems that I've been trying to say it could exist, right? That's why doing this evaluation, if you do one, which I would very much encourage, just once isn't enough. These tools continuously change, right? And so, and how people use them changes too. So I do think that from an evaluation perspective, I think one outcome variable you might want to consider in everything you do is not just productivity or creativity. These are the first order things that people often look at, because if you're an organization, you care about productivity. It's like one of the things that, gets your share price up. So that's why people look. But that doesn't mean we should stop there, right? Like in many of the evaluations that I've done that are outside the AI sector, I work a lot in ED&I and diversity, of hiring and promotions. Obviously, you know what the outcome variables for that is, right? And I think we need to push that conversation into the conversation of AI evaluations. And I think we are still at the early stages of this. So the more we have people be aware of this and do high quality evaluation, the better.
Okay, yeah, that's yes, really interesting answer, and actually brings us nicely onto another question. So I think quite a lot of people are quite interested in the assertion that the evaluation needs to be constantly sort of iterative. And the sort of challenge there is that a lot of like smaller organizations may not have capacity to do large scale evaluations, but also the question of so how do you handle that if you're a sort of smaller, more independent organization? But also, if your evaluation needs to be iterative, how do we keep evaluation sort of at pace with AI development at the same time? Also trying to keep in mind that need to bring in lots of different voices about the impact it is having on the services that we're providing. Sorry, I've put a few questions into one, but you see where we're going with that.
Yes, for sure. Let me start on the first bit around sample size, basically, right? Like sort of as a researcher, I think about this a lot, obviously. So you're right. If you're a very small organization, it's much harder to do. I would say that, there's a responsibility I think everybody has, every organization, every individual, to test and learn. But obviously, the smaller the sample, the harder it is to do this at a scale where you can learn statistically what it does to you. Now, I think you can still do a little bit of that work internally, right? To sort of challenge yourself and make sure that people don't get habituated to whatever AI gives you. I also think there's now, hopefully, more than ever, because the world is more connected and organizations are realizing they are using similar tools, right? It's not that only one organization uses ChatGPT, many are using it. There's probably a role for consortia to emerge from this, right? Organizations trying to actually learn from each other. And I think actually we have seen this in other domains happen as well, where, for better, like sometimes with success and sometimes less so. Like if you think about schools, right? Like any individual school cannot test the easiest or the best way to teach, but many schools together in the UK or around the world can. And so RCTs could be done at scale if people come together doing this. So that's the answer to, I think, sample size. It's not saying that, you shouldn't do it. Maybe think about creative ways that you become part of a movement that allows for this to happen. If you're a large organization, by the way, like 10,000 people, 50,000 people, 100,000 people or more, then I think it's very much in your ballpark of operation you could do this. And I think often I find that they don't normally do it, but they really should. I think it's a huge opportunity and a lost opportunity if they don't try it. Cousin, there was a second part of this question. Let me just quickly check if I so this is the first one.
Also thinking about sort of what's the appropriate sort of frequency,
the frequency,
proportionate frequency to evaluate it, and how do we keep pace? Like, because you sort of talked a lot about how AI is constantly changing, constantly moving, constantly learning. So how do we evaluate iteratively and try to keep pace if it's constantly changing? Like, what is it that we're evaluating, and how do we keep pace with it?
It's a great question. Now, I think I don't have like a definitive answer to this, and I think partly it's because it's still also evolving for me to be part of this conversation, right? Like I've worked with a lot of organizations in the past on like organizational change, for instance, in trying to figure out what they're trying to do. And if you have like one important change in your organization, you evaluate it usually once and see where it goes. But if you're good at this, you start doing check-ins more often and see if you can evaluate that. Now, AI is faster than a lot of organizational change. And so I think we need to think about like, what's the right time frame for this and frequency. And I think actually my advice would be, if you build a framework like an RCT into this from the beginning, then it won't be too hard to occasionally And I think this will be a surprise to people, but I think it's okay to turn some features off. Just because they have them once in your workplace doesn't mean they always have to have access to them. You can say that we're experimenting and trying things out, and people actually quite like that. If you're not sure that that's true, ask yourself how often you've been to Google and Facebook and every other technology firm. They change things all the time, and we're not really aware of it. They're just making these changes very naturally happen. And if within a few days or a week, suddenly there's people raising questions or not raising or saying like, why is it not here anymore? The organization learns from that as well, right? And I think lastly, I think just to say that I think I'm not pushing for evaluation every day. Again, some of the big, large technology firms do exactly that when they run an experiment on Facebook. Of course, they have so much user data, they will do this on a daily basis. But I think for most organizations, we're talking here the cycle is like weeks, months, or potentially once a year, right? But the point is not once only and then declaring victory, because it could just the next development phase will just show another tool. So be ready for that to come, that next version of ChatGPT being released, and it could do so much more suddenly.
Okay, thanks, Oliver. Okay, so sticking with sort of evaluation, I think you mentioned RCTs quite a lot, and someone sort of asked here, and this is always, I think, a question around RCTs and a fair one. And I can't remember the technical term for it now, but as organisations are complex and interactive systems, we cannot assume necessarily independence of people using different things. So how does this affect the evaluation strategies?
Great question. Yeah. So, obviously for people who are used to RCTs, they'll have confronted this many times. It's difficult, right? Like if you are sitting in an office and I'm getting the news tool and my neighbor doesn't, it could be spillover suddenly, right? That my neighbor comes over here and starts looking in at the new ChatGPT tool that I have access to, but they don't. So I agree that the spillover really is a problem that you could run into. There's different ways to deal with this. So partly, it may not be as big of a deal as people sometimes think it is. So for instance, the trial that I mentioned, the RCT on Microsoft, the adoption was really low in treatment group to start with. But even when it got higher to like 40%, they measured, of course, whether people in the control group had access to it. And somehow 0.5% did. So, okay, there's some people in the control that somehow got access to this tool when they shouldn't. From an evaluation perspective, obviously don't treat those people like their treatment now. There's something called intention to treat. So you keep them in the control. It's just that it's a bit unusual that they got access, spillover or whatever reason they might have that. If you are really, and then by the way, you can still measure those differences because 40% of people using it versus 0.5% is such a massive difference that whatever you see here should tell you what AI is really like versus the tiny minority that really won't have much of an impact in the control as a whole. But if you are concerned about this spillover problem in interdependence, the technical term probably that you mentioned, Kirsten, is a cluster RCT that you could run. Mm-hmm. So rather than doing it individually, you could do it by office, by unit, by team, whatever is available to you, but it has implications for sample size. So you'll have to have a bigger organization to do this, but it's certainly a conservative way to do it and will avoid some of the problems.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the using AI as an evaluator, someone's asked whether we think AI, and this is something that is talked about, I think, in the evaluation world quite a lot, and it'd be interesting to hear what you've got to say. And that is, do we think AI is already good enough to provide a customized synthesis of evidence that could inform policy decisions? And what are the sort of, I guess, risks and benefits of potentially using AI in that kind of rapid evidence assessment type kind of way, maybe?
So this could be a very, very long answer, and I'm afraid I probably won't have that time. So I'm going to be short and careful about this for two reasons. One of them is that I'm actually doing right now a review and looking around and talking to lots of people on the What Works centers who are very interested in the evidence synthesis, right? There's a lot of things that they're interested in this area. So they are probably some of the best places for evidence to go anyway right now, right? And so they're obviously interested in this question because it's one of those areas that if we could use AI to speed this up, it would be a very powerful way to do this. So I think one of the things that we're looking at is to what extent are the tools already out there and how reliable are they? And I would say that one of the things that in general, and there's the Campbell Foundation and others have already developed tools in that direction. I would say on both of these sides, the people who generate evidence use it and the ones who are using or generating those tools, there's an active debate. I don't think people have an answer to this question yet. In fact, I'm pretty sure they don't, because ESSC and the Wellcome Trust just announced something about 50 million in funding collectively to have big developments in that area. So I think the potential is big, but I think the risks are just as big, right? Like imagine an area where people are trying to get evidence very rapidly pulled together. And even one mistake, like I said before, but one mistake can be enough to dent public trust quite a bit. And so I think there will need to be very careful rail guards again, sort of like safety systems and quality assurance systems in place to make sure that the errors don't get through. Because ultimately, when it comes to evidence, and this is something that, especially on the policy side, we do rely very much on. When we do want to use evidence, we want good evidence, right? So we need to make sure that that step isn't skipped for efficiency reasons. And so I think the quality element of this will be very important. So that means to me, there'll be a human in the loop, basically, somewhere. What that looks like in practice, we have to see. And I think it will also depend a little bit on how fast AI will develop in that area. But I'm looking forward to seeing the next 5 to 10 years because of these big investments. Clearly, there's appetite for this, and clearly we'll see a lot of things happening, hopefully soon. But we'll see.
Thanks, Oliver. I think it's sort of looking for a cheat sheet, really, isn't it, to how to synthesize evidence quickly. But it's such a sort of careful area that we need to get right. I'm just going to remind people that if you did want to pop your hands up, then you're more than welcome. I can't see any hands up now, so I'll keep going through the questions that have been written down. And the next question is sticking with the use of AI in evaluation, and just asking whether there has been much testing of using AI within evaluations. So there's been some some conversation in the chat around, whether AI can create theories of change, whether it can be used to generate research questions, generate survey questions, that kind of thing. Has there been much testing of the use of AI in that particular space as yet?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, I've been talking about the evaluation of the impact of AI, and you can ask a different question that uses very similar words, which is, can we use AI to do better evaluations? And I think that, so hopefully we're going to have a bit of a seminar down the line, both on the qualitative and quantitative use of AI in how people do research. So I'm not going to be probably the person to answer all of these questions, but I do think that there will be people who are absolute experts in this. So my current sense is people do use it. I think I've heard of people use it in their research practice, whether it's to come up with survey questions or even if just spell checking and proofreading, that's another way you could do it. Some people try to use it in their quantitative evaluations. So quantitative measurements, like for instance, if you're used to or heard of causal forests, that's a way to do something like that, or the double machine learning sort of a process where you have machine learning try to select certain variables that you use in your control set, basically, in your covariates effectively to reduce standard errors. There's a lot of technical stuff you can use it for. So I think that hopefully we'll have some seminars that will teach those things in particular. And qualitatively, I think, by the way, it's also been used, from what I understand, to like code responses and pull out things. I would say one thing I should say to maybe people who are in academia and on the research side, one thing I would say, that's my personal take on this, is just to say, especially on the junior side, it's probably, it seems very convenient to sometimes use these tools to coding and other things. That's kind of what I meant about potentially shortcuts in downskilling. Like if you think about doing a PhD and if you don't learn those basic skills, it might just become very much harder in the future if you don't know how to run your analysis without the help of ChatGPT running the code for you. It because simply, we don't know how these tools will develop, or more importantly, what the policies around them will be, the governance, right? Some journals allow the use of AI and some don't. Some are very strict about what they say you have to declare and some don't. So I think that just keep in mind that these tools are available, but also keep in mind the framework in which they're operating, right? So it's just maybe a warning that I think even if it's available, just check whether you should use it. Going back to what we said about responsible AI use, these are areas we need to evaluate because I think the governance and the frameworks aren't fully there yet.
I think that it's interesting. And one of the first questions on the chats was actually about who owns the images that it produces. But I think it's worth saying the same thing there. I think there's often a bit of confusion, like if you enter things into certain products, like what happens to what you enter and what happens to the output of it? Does it become part of the public domain? Because I think that, proprietary issues, and certainly as a researcher, you want to be able to publish, like, do we know what the kind of landscape around ownership of input and outputs of AI mean yet?
That's a good question. To be honest, I just had a conversation last week with a lawyer about this, who's an expert on the law of AI, and I wish I could do a good job at like summarizing all the things he said. But let's just say legislation is different in different countries. So I thought it was actually fairly homogeneous, and he said it's not actually at the moment. But there's sort of in between cases, like the example he gave us, the autonomous car, right? Like in cases where the car helps you make decision, you're ultimately the responsible user of it if there's an accident. If it fully makes a decision for you, then the car the manufacturer carries some responsibility. Now, if you think about ChatGPT and all of the tools we're using to generate images and such, first of all, the creatives are usually not compensated for that. So that's a huge lawsuit already happening in the US and elsewhere to figure out how we can, or hopefully will, pay them for all of the things they've done in the past to like generate the data sets for this. But also, how much of the ownership should go to ChatGPT, right? Like in creating this, and how much to you for writing the prompt? Very open questions. I don't know what the legal framework is to evaluate them right now, but I do think they are being discussed right now. I should tell you one more thing that we have in a study that we have run on creativity, which I didn't present today, but we had questions at the end about whether people think that the stories that were written by AI or not, right? Like that's one question, whether people could figure out. They're not very good at figuring this out, is one finding. And the other one is, if you now know, we told them this story did have help from AI, or potentially there was an AI starting point, which we showed them, and the writer had access to this, how much do you think the final product, which they then see as well, obviously, how much do you think is ownership between the two? And on average, we get a discount, what we call a discount of 30%. So if you use AI, people will think, on average, in our studies at least here, that you did 2/3 of the work and AI did 1/3. Now, you need to know yourself, whether you're okay with that, right? Like that's maybe fair or not fair, depending on the context, but on average in our studies, that's what we found.
Okay, that's really interesting that it's sort of monetizable. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll finish with the kind of, I guess, the $1 million question, which is about value for money. A couple of people have asked a couple of different things. So there's a specific question in one of the examples that you used. Was any work done, so the Mexico benefit example, was any work done on value for money, and was it worth developing the tool for the amount of money retrieved or not? Because I think there's probably quite a lot of perception that AI can be an efficiency saving measure. And then somebody's also asked whether you feel it is acceptable to rely on self-reported measures around productivity increase. And that second question was in relation to evaluations of things like Copilot that are used on, I think, on Microsoft Teams. But just in general, like, you know, is there quite a lot of evidence that it is creating that value for money?
Great question. I think that will definitely depend on context, right? I think I can see examples where a small company invests a lot of money and ends up finding that it doesn't actually help them that much, and it will be rather painful, but probably better to find out early that it's not value for money and then move on with something else. There will be other cases where I think it will be value for money. For instance, I think so the New Mexico case, what's interesting is this was part of a much larger transformation they were doing anyway. I don't think this one component I showed here was evaluated separately. I mean, I would have to go back. Some of this is certainly public and some isn't, but my sense is the general transformation they did was, I think, evaluated, and I think it was positive. But to be fair, I wasn't involved in that. So it's a good question. I'm pretty sure we didn't get any answer on this particular part of it that I was involved in. It's a great question. I think it needs to happen more often. I think a lot of times we don't even ask the question to start with. So I think whoever asks for the question is the right question to ask. I would first look at the impact evaluation to start with, and then couple that with a value for money or value for investment sort of evaluation. I think really important because, like I said, for any given context, we might find that it's not worth it. And that's okay. If the marginal benefit isn't there, you can do the old-fashioned way. You might still be happy with that until maybe in 10 years from now, a new tool comes along that you find, or even 2 years from now, who knows, that you find really does add value for money for you. So yes, great question.
Okay, thank you so much, Oliver. We've only got 1 minute left, so it really just leaves me to say thank you so much for your time, and just to remind people that this is kind of the starting point of a larger conversation. And as I've mentioned already, like UKES is partnering with other organisations because this is such a big and important topic, both the use of AI in evaluation as practitioners of evaluation and professionals, but then the evaluation of AI and its use in other spaces is such a big thing. So I'll just quickly mention that we've got more talks coming up. We're partnering with the Social Research Association and the Campaign for Social Sciences. And would you like to remind us of the speaker and the date in January that we've already got lined up?
Right. So it's EAT. I'll just pull this up really quick here again so you can see it if you're, sorry, yep. So yes, like Kirsten said, it's the Evaluation Society, SRA, and Academy of Social Sciences, and obviously a bit of a pitch here also for the Data Science Institute, where I'm at. I would say that it's Iyad Rahwan who does fantastic work exactly at the intersection of AI as a computer scientist, but also the social sciences. So I would very much encourage people to attend on January 30th, 12:30 to 2, and hopefully bring your questions around ethics and AI.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for coming. It was really, really interesting, beneficial talk. So we'll see more of you, I'm sure, Oliver, at UCAS. So
yes, and please reach out. Any questions, reach out, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you then.